Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's talk. I'm Andy Bailey from Dartmoor National Park. Tonight we're going to discover the history of Dartmoor in 10 objects with the National Park archaeologist Andy Crabb. So before that gets underway, let me just run through a few things just in case you're not familiar with the way these talks work yet. If you want to get in touch with us while the talk is going on, then you can use the live chat function, which should show up somewhere around your screen on the YouTube channel. You need to be signed in for that to use that function. If you don't want to sign in, you can email us as well at education@dartmoor.gov.uk, and you can see that just below my chin. I seem to have sunk below my titles a little bit there. Yeah, email us your questions or drop us a line through the live chat as we go on tonight. So this is the last of our series of talks that we've been running over the last 2 weeks. This is number 4 in our selection. If you've missed any of the talks, they are all live on YouTube, so you can go back and pick up some of those talks. And indeed, there are a whole range of other talks that we've done over the last few months, last year, that you can pick up and find out pretty much everything you need to know about Dartmoor from there. So lots of really great talks to pick your way through there. So this is going to be the last of our talks for a little while. We're going to have a break in August, and then we might even be able to try and have a face-to-face talk in September. We're just trying to work on that, but we're obviously mindful of the COVID situation, so that might be an online talk as well. Right, I can see that I've got quite a few of you in the room with us, so welcome to all of you who've just joined us over the last few minutes. So I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, Andy Crabb. I'm just going to bring him up and bring him across. Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Hello, good evening. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, are you all right there? You having a good
Y-
day today?
Yeah, very hot as usual here in Exeter, but getting used to it now. Hope
Yeah.
you're all cooling down.
Yeah, I hope so. As I was saying before we went live, this room that I'm in is quite a warm room. So anybody who looks at, sees me, you'll see me starting to go slightly red through the course of the evening and melting. But there is plenty of water on hand, and I hope you've all got lots of refreshments as well, so you can keep cool while the talk is going on. So, as I said, Andy is one of our Dartmoor National Park archaeologists. Those of you who've been on some of our talks right in the early days will have met Andy before on the talks, but in this little season we've met Lee Bray, the other Dartmoor National Park archaeologist, and together they are the intrepid duo who go out and look after all of the national parks monuments and stuff. So yeah, so Andy, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm just going to tell everybody in the room that I'm going to be monitoring the chat function, and
Yay.
I'm also going to be just keeping an eye on the emails as well. So I'm going to go and be quiet, but in the meantime, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Andy Crabb. So Andy, I'm just going to send you up with your slides. So let me just do that. Over to you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, and hello everyone again. Yeah, it's been quite a challenge really to just choose 10 objects which kind of reflect Dartmoor's rich archaeological past. And I've had to delve right back into the midst of time this time. And it's a kind of general introduction to our archaeological history here on the moor. And we're blessed on Dartmoor. I'm sure some of you have been on these talks before, but we have at least 85,000 known sites in our area of Dartmoor, which is about 365 square kilometres. So by density, I think Dartmoor is one of the richest places in the country for archaeology. You can walk across entire landscapes and not be bored of what you can find. And every day is different out on the moor. Depending on the conditions, you can see things in a new light. It really is a fascinating place to be. I'm really blessed to be here. But I'm going to press on, and my first, all the objects really are worthy of a talk in their own right. So I hope I'm not too generalist. But the first object I selected was for a time, long way back, 125,000 years ago, from a time when it was even hotter in Devon than it has been this week. My first object is likely the rarest one as far as we know in this assemblage as well, finds as well. And this is the fossilized tooth. Let me get my laser pointer. Oops. Is fossilized tooth of, I have to pronounce this, Paleoloxodon antiquus. And I'm sure some of you know that that is in fact a straight tusked elephant. And there's its tooth there. And note all these other bones. And this deposit of bones is in the bone caves at Buckfastleigh, which were revealed by quarrying, otherwise known properly as the John Mintner Cave. Now, the straight tusked elephant was roaming around Devon and Eurasia 125,000 years ago, and it was incredibly hot then. To give it its proper name, this period of time is known as Marine Isotope Stage 5. Some of you may know it as the Ipswichian period, and if you are more widely read in paleo-environmental matters, you would recognise it as the Eemian period, basically a very warm period between two immense slabs of ice. Okay. During this time, as I said, the global temperatures are about 2 to 4 degrees hotter, with the warmest peak coming around 100,000 years ago. Forests at that time reached to the far north of Norway and probably beyond. Sea levels were about 6 to 9 metres higher than they are today, so Britain was probably an island well detached from Europe. This is the warmest time to date, only to date, you know the way things are going, that hominid species, including our ancestors, the Neanderthals, have had to endure. Humans were developing, were just emerged as a separate species by this time. Okay, so let's have a look at our elephant. Okay, these individuals, and I've got a reconstruction drawing here, were large beasts. You wouldn't want to meet one when they were angry. This one stood about 4 meters tall. This is a reconstruction model based in Germany, and you can see how it got its name, the straight tusked elephant here. So as I said, they're about 4 meters tall in height, and they clocked in at around 11 tons, believe it or not. Whilst researching this, I discovered that underneath Barnstaple Town car park, they found the skeleton of a straight-tusked elephant, and there is a replica of one in Barnstaple and North Devon Museum, should you be up that way. Now, these animals grazed on a diet of vegetation consisting of maple, hornbeam, hazelnut, alder, ash, and beech and ivy, which came from the preserved remains of their stomach contents. And that's a great way of reconstructing past environments. And that kind of surprised me that there are a lot of similar species in that list surviving in hotter temperatures than today. Maybe that could give our foresters some clues to what to plan for in the coming decades as global temperatures hot up. Now, given their huge bulk and no doubt their powerful tusks and the fact that they could stand on their hind legs and browse to a height of 8 meters, these animals must have heavily influenced their environment, creating clearings, causing floods, creating ruts and muddy and boggy areas. So just imagine those being rewilded today. Quite impressive. Okay. We're going to return back to this slide. The bone caves were discovered along with 4,000 other mammal bones. And they were discovered at a really bizarre time, which I find really bizarre to understand. Someone called A.H. Olgley found them in 1939, when the Second World War started, and they actually carried out an excavation from 1939 to 1941, strangely when the war was raging, which I find absolutely incredible. Then things went quiet, and then more test pits were sunk by a guy called Sutcliffe in 1954 and 1955. Amongst that assemblage of 4,000 mammal bones, other species recovered included bisons, hyena, foxes, hippopotamuses, and beaver as well. It was not for nothing that this cave was nicknamed the Bone Cave. Its real name, as you can see, is the John Mintner Cave, and I'm grateful for the Pengelly Cave Trust for loaning me and giving me permission to use this image tonight. And throughout August, if you go onto their website, you can visit this cave, I think, and learn more about these amazing deposits. It's a very forgotten part of Dartmoor, and this early Paleolithic period is something we even skip over all the time when we forget about this wonderful resource we have right on the edge of our national park. Unfortunately, in 2015, thieves broke into the cave and stole some of those bones you can see, including our elephant's tooth. Humans were not part of the picture, as I mentioned, and we don't think they came to Devon for another 85,000 years. And I'm sure some of you know that a human jawbone, which is 40,000 years old, is the first evidence of humans in Devon, was found in Kent's Cavern in Torbados back after quite a long time ago now, I think in the 19th century. But what about our close ancestors, the Neanderthals? Did they manage to get over here? We think probably not. We think they didn't have time to come over to the British Isles before the next ice age came. The other reason I wanted to highlight this period is because the uplands which were to become Dartmoor were being really heavily eroded during this time. The cycles of ice and then tropical temperatures caused immense erosion, and that led to materials washing off the uplands to expose the granite outcrops, which make Dartmoor famous for today, the tors. And it also brought down into the valley bottoms the tin ore and deposited areas of china clay, which became economically important thousands and thousands of years later. Okay, so that's our first slide. Now I'm leaping forward quite a bit, almost 110,000 years to the Mesolithic period. After the seesaw climatic fluctuations of the Paleolithic, we emerged around 14,000 years ago into this golden age we're living in now. We're so lucky to be alive, and we're screwing it up quite rapidly. And this period we call the Holocene. We think we're in an interglacial period at the moment, and it's provided stable and kind of favourable climatic conditions for our species to really dominate and evolve. As the ice retreated, so forests, species, various varieties of trees swept into the void, replacing the tundra. And the type of species which came would depend on the natural succession of the vegetation until they ended up with the climatic vegetation, which survives in some parts today throughout Europe. However, evidence from pollen core and other environmental evidence kind of reveals that the traditional view of a close canopy forest covering the whole of Britain, you know, a squirrel could hop from Land's End to John O'Groats without touching the floor, probably wasn't true. We've seen the size of some of those straight-tusked elephants. Their descendants were pretty tall as well. They weren't elephants, but quite large browsers in the environment, which had an ecological niche, which would have made forest clearings, including kind of natural lightning strikes and natural forest fires as well. It was probably that the Canada forest was quite broken up in places. And we also know from recent research on Dartmoor that peat bogs were already in place, albeit on a smaller scale than today, and was starting to spread across the landscape. So it's quite likely some of our higher summits were clear of trees. Evidence of our trees is starting to emerge from peat erosion. This is the Swincoln Valley, and here's some bog oak. Well, I think it's oak. We've got to get this dated and tested before it deteriorates rapidly, if we can find the funds to do it. But numerous examples of bog timber have been recognised on Dartmoor. And it's during this time that humans had returned to Britain permanently and were settled and were starting to go around the landscape in small bands, famously called hunter-gatherers. We call them a different term now. They're called hunter-fisher-gatherer foragers, which is much more of a mouthful. But in the acidic conditions of Dartmoor and the continuing development of peat, a lot of these Mesolithic sites where they stopped and camped seasonally are probably awaiting discovery. They're lost underneath that peat covering or have been eroded away. And they lived in an organic world. These guys, they knew exactly the availability of resources, how to manipulate and use every available item in the flora and fauna of their local environment. Nothing probably went to waste, and all their organic materials I mentioned disappeared and rotted away, except for their flints. And you can see this collection of flints here, which came from the area around Ashburton. And by the standards of flint technology, these are almost the creme de la creme. You almost have a toolkit here of small blades which can perform any task you could wish to do, like cutting hide, scraping fat off hide, cutting and trimming wood, cutting meat, etc., splitting twine, anything you can think of. But most of it, and they're very thin, narrow blades, they're bladelets. And they're quite small, as you can see by the scale. And that gives us a clue that the environment they're probably operating in a lot of the time was quite closed canopy in the forest, kind of pastoral forest environment. And also that the tools themselves were composite. and that means that they could detach and take off or add blades as they needed. Famously, harpoons have been found up in Yorkshire at the site of Star Car, which had multiple blades on them. These ones, when you look at them, are really fantastic, and I'm pleased to say we're just starting a new PhD jointly with some Central Midlands universities looking at our Mesolithic flint assemblage, because it is quite vast, and we suspect that in some of the other flint collections in our local museums there's a lot more Mesolithic flints out there. And we know from ethnographic studies elsewhere that these bands of hunter-gatherers weren't plain as depicted in that reconstruction drawing. They're probably adorned with lots of skin decorations and personal decorations as well, and they would have led a rich and complex life, and they would have known the landscape better than anyone. Think of a souped up version of Ray Mears, for example. They'd have known exactly where to go, what time of year, and how to survive. And that worked very successfully. They're a very successful way of living. And so it's quite strange to think that around 6,000 years ago, the whole hunter-gatherer lifestyle disappeared, and it was replaced by the modern world, basically a farming, sedentary lifestyle. Obviously, it took a few thousand years to take place, but that leaves us on to this transformation to take place. But that leads us on to my third object, which is this wonderful Neolithic axe, which comes or was recovered from Postbridge and is now in the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter. And again, I'm grateful for Tom Cadbury for photographing this for me. Now, this is a beautiful object. It's had a rough life, as you can see from this picture, but originally it would have had a polished surface. This stone is a type of Cornish greenstone called gabbro, and when you polish that for hours and hours and hours using probably leather and a fine kind of abrasive like sand or gravels, you get a really nice sheen. And we think that's the clue to these axes. Some would have been used for chopping down trees and other tasks, but most seem to be used in a wide network of exchange. And the symbolism of the axe, we believe, was important. And that's why I've chosen this today. For me, it's a symbol of that dynamic change, that revolutionary switch from that hunter-gatherer, almost idyllic lifestyle to this hard, labour-driven, time-poor, labour-intense lifestyles of farming, which has stayed with us ever since, and some would say it's got worse. So now we're in the Neolithic, and there's much debate about when that actually occurred, this switch, and how it occurred. Some people think it was a rapid switch of population, of invaders coming over and wiping out the hunter-gatherers. Others think hunter-gatherers adopted the technology. The evidence now is pointing to the earlier theories that it was a kind of rapid replacement of population. Now, this green axe, stone axe, came from the Lidford Peninsula in Cornwall, and through studies of axes elsewhere in the country, when you look at the rock analysis, the petrological analysis, and find those outcrops where the material was sourced from, they don't often come from the most obvious accessible places. They tend to come from the most dangerous locations, like mountain crags up in the Peak District, the Lake District at the Pike of Sickle, or on cliff tops. And we think these places were very special places, being in these liminal zones. Perhaps they were close to the ancestors. Perhaps the danger involved with obtaining these materials gave the axes some special powers. And we think for that reason they became symbols of worth and symbolic in their own right. And Cornish axes in particular are found all over southern Britain. And we think it's very obvious to think with the way we transport around a landscape that may not represent that much time depth, but we think through wear analysis and just by studying these objects really closely and understanding the context they're found in, that these objects may have spread across the landscape in a network of exchange over several generations, over several centuries in fact. So this Neolithic axe is fantastic, and around with the Neolithic package, it's sometimes called, people started building monuments. And on Dartmoor, some of our earliest monuments are the cromlech, the chambered tombs you can see on the left-hand side. And this shot's nice because it includes some sheep as well, which came over the Neolithic farming package as well. And on the right-hand side, you can see Scorrel Stone Circle. And our dating evidence for stone circles is pretty poor, but we think these may have been late Neolithic monuments. So people are starting to construct monuments and bury their dead or certain members of their societies in these communal tombs in very specific locations close to rivers and in prominent natural topographical settings. Again, wide open views seems to be important. Somewhere detached and liminal seems to be important as well. And on Dartmoor, another project has just started up, which Lee's involved with, and his colleagues from Leicester University, looking at an intriguing site called Tor enclosures. And we believe these are Neolithic in date, and they're very peculiar to the granite upland areas of Devon and Cornwall, and some examples near Camborne at Carnbray and Helmond and Bodmin Moor have been excavated, but none on Dartmoor. And those excavations took place quite a while ago. And we believe these are Neolithic in date, so that's around 6,000 to 5,500 years. And they're quite peculiar. They don't seem to be defensive, even though they're on top of hill forts. Perhaps they did have that function, but they seem to link up really distinct natural outcrops, striking features within the landscape. And they seem to enclose hills close to watercourses or close to deep gorges, and they seem to be designed to be seen. And it seems likely that during this time, most of the woodland cover on Dartmoor and elsewhere in the country being rapidly reduced, not totally obliterated, but quite severely reduced to what it was like in the Mesolithic. So we're hoping this summer to do some limited excavation again up at Whittor and other sites to try and extract some dating evidence and try and find out what the purposes of these monuments were. And there may be volunteering opportunities, so please check back to our website if you want to be involved. We think these are the kind of southwest example of causewayed enclosures, which these have been excavated elsewhere in England and very abundant, and they just seem to be areas of ritual community gatherings for feastings and exchange. So it'd be great if we can find some material and artifactual evidence to back that up. Okay, I just got to catch up with my notes a little bit. But here we go. Let's move on to item 4, object 4, which is the White Horse Hill grave goods. Now, some of you may have attended a talk last year when I talked about the White Horse Hill burial in more detail. So apologies if you're here, but this is just a rapid skip through. Now, a major discovery was made in 2011 when DNPA archaeologists, I was on paternity leave, unfortunately, so I missed out on the glory, commissioned the excavation of the White Horse burial kist. And here you can see Sean Taylor from the Cornwall Archaeological Unit just recording the capstone before it's lifted off to see what is in that stone-lined burial chamber known as a kist. It's quite an unusual location for a kist. Normally we find them within stone burial cairns, but this one you can see was inserted into the peat, and you can see how deep the peat is. It's about 1.5 meters deep here, and had probably started forming at the beginning of the Neolithic period, if not earlier. So our peat bogs on Dartmoor are very old indeed. So the White Horse Hill kist was discovered in the 1990s due to erosion. This was an island of peat which had been left by the peat cutters, and an observant amateur archaeologist spotted the structure in the edge of the peat hag. However, by repeated bad winters and terrible weather meant that peat hag was eroding rapidly. We built some dry stone walling to try and face it off, but they just kept collapsing. So in 2011, it was decided to carry out an excavation of the site before it was lost. And as the grave, right, sorry, just a bit lost. And we didn't have any expectation of what we'd find. Judging from the early archaeological reports from the antiquarians about 100 years before us, they didn't find much really. But that's probably because they were rushing their excavation and didn't have the science analysis and the scientific tools we have to carry on excavations when the deposits are removed and taken to the lab. What we found was a fantastic survival of organic and inorganic goods, and the preservation far exceeded our expectations. However, we only found we only realised there's a grave deposit in there on the last day of the excavation, as is always the case, when a bead turned up literally about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So the whole deposit had to be wrapped up in cellophane and taken to the Wiltshire Museums in Chippenham, where it was finally excavated over a series of about 4 months. The grave contained the cremated remains of a young adult, probably a female, who was placed in the kist around about 3,700 years ago. They had been wrapped in an animal pelt, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. and analysis revealed it was a brown bear. Now that was one of the hardest conundrums of the whole process, was identifying that animal pelt. So we know that the brown bears were around in the British Isles at that time, and it was fastened by a copper alloy pin. Other grade goods accompanied the deceased into her afterlife. These included 200 beads of fired clay, shale, probably from Dorset, amber from the Baltic, and you can see that here on the top right-hand slide image, and intriguingly for the southwest of England, a tin ingot as well, a tin bead. And is this the first evidence we've got of tin working on Dartmoor? Also, we found or recovered were wooden studs, which you can see at the bottom right hand corner, and these were worn as librettes in the ears or the lips. We also recovered fragments of textile and leather, and the fragments of textile were amazing. They were composite materials. There was bits of leather hem from a calf hide stitched to probably a skirt or a shawl made of nettle fibres. And we also found this fantastic lime basket, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And I think that's the oldest such container found anywhere in Europe. A couple of flint tools were also found, and a bracelet, top left-hand corner there, of cow hair, which is woven around tin studs. And I think there are about 20 tin studs, and that basketry container I mentioned. The White Horse finds have offered an amazing and valuable insight into the early Bronze Age world of Dartmoor. Excuse me. The beads of the necklace, for example, show us that far from being isolated, Dartmoor was part of a much wider trading network. We had contacts over a much wider world, as backed up by the amber beads, which had come all the way from the Baltic. The textiles, leather and basketry show us the range of organic resources that were being exploited and the consummate skill of which objects were crafted. The wooden librettes hint at some of the ways in which the Bronze Age people used their appearance to express themselves and their identities, while the bear pelt may be telling us that the wider environment of the early Bronze Age was very different to the one of that today. In summary, the White Horse kiss is a find of probably international significance, which will inform the way we think about the Bronze Age for many years to come. Perhaps just as importantly, it gives us some idea of what else might still be awaiting discovery out there in the moor. Now, as you know, Dartmoor is rightly famous for its Bronze Age landscapes. So this is just kind of rewritten the book. It's the first time we found these organic remains surviving so well. And on the left-hand side, you can see our artistic impression of the burial taking place. And the environment, as you can see, is not that dissimilar from the moored environments of today. And on the right-hand side, you can see a model is wearing some of the replicas. You can see how beautiful and striking that jewellery was, and you can see the bear pelt around her shoulders as well. Okay, now Dartmoor is famous, as I said, for its Bronze Age features and its diversity of burial cairns in which you normally find kists. And here are just two examples. The one in the top left-hand corner from Belliver there is an elaborate embellished cairn. And you can see the kist capstone in the centre, and there's a ring of edge-set stones around it. And at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the more kind of run-of-the-mill, but probably no less exceptional cairn. An upturned pudding basin appearance of a stone mound, circular round cairn there. We've got about 450 cairns on Dartmoor. Most of them have had antiquarian investigations in the past, but we know just by surveying them in detail with volunteers that these were elaborate structures and were modified and had architectural details added and probably removed them throughout their complex stories, and they could lifetime, and they could have been in use for several generations. Now, my final prehistoric slide is really another fossil rather than an object, and this rather messy picture you can see is a remarkable archaeological discovery, and it traps a moment in time. For around about 3,500 years ago, on what is now Shawmore in the southwest of Dartmoor, herds of domesticated livestock walked or perhaps shepherded alongside a stone field boundary known locally as a reeve, and they left their hoof prints impressed in the soft silts of the accompanying ditch. Now, I'm amazed that the archaeologists who were excavating this site in the 1970s spotted this, and it's testament to their skill and observation, because excavating on Dartmoor is pretty hard at the best of times. And the team who found this belonged to the Central Excavation Unit, who were digging a large part of Shawmore and the Bronze Age features there in advance of China clay workings, where they were going to tip all their spoil over this. And unfortunately, parts of the site have been lost now underneath those huge clay tips. Now, these hoof prints were found alongside, as I mentioned, the Saddlesbury Reeve, and reeves are low stony linear banks about 2 metres wide that were constructed as field boundaries and divided up large areas of land into manageable parcels, which we think were likely to have been grazed by livestock. By the Middle Bronze Age, that's about 3,500 years ago, large areas of Dartmoor had been enclosed by these reef systems. This indicates a large part of the moor was now open grazing with similar grassland species found today. A lot of the former tree cover had been felled, but we now know from environmental evidence and artifactual evidence that surviving woodlands were there and were likely to have been carefully managed and coppiced, as they would have been a valuable resource. We often see the Bronze Age as this stone world. We're just seeing the bare bones of what's left. It was very much an organic world, and most of the material has been lost to us. So, on closer examination, when the cast was made, we found some familiar characters who made these prints. We had sheep, we had cattle, and we had ponies. And what is more remarkable, I think, that when recently a researcher measured the hoof prints of the ponies and compared them to our own Dartmoor pony herd, and discovered that the size of the animals was almost virtually the same. Now, the original cast of the hoof prints was in Plymouth Museum, but currently I'm right in thinking that it's at the Postbridge Visitor Centre if you want to go and have a look at it. Saying that, it may be on its way back to the newly opened Box Museum in Plymouth very shortly. However, another set of paw prints were revealed, and that turned out to be a badger. So I often wonder if TB was an issue for farmers back in the Bronze Age as it was today. Now, this next slide, I just want to show the complex landscapes these reef systems created. And if you look carefully, you can see the long linear boundaries dividing up the landscape into these rectangular strips. And if you look really carefully, you can see where there are parallel lines of droveways going through the enclosed land out to open areas of moorland. So basically, we think 3,500 years ago, the fundamentals of the Dartmoor landscape, private enclosed land and open moorland had been set up, was being established. Who knows, that communal grazing is probably the forerunners of today's commons. So I think that's an incredible survival. Now, if you look carefully, you can see the circles, and these are hut circles. And in this area of Frowley Common, we've got about 25 hut circles. On Dartmoor, at the last count, we had about 5,000 possible hut circles, of about 4,500 of those that have been verified. So a huge number. And that's really what that's probably the crown in Dartmoor's archaeology on a landscape scale. And rather like the cairns, excavation has revealed that hut circles were really complex and elaborate features. They had their own life stories. They were carefully built. They weren't the crude structures traditionally portrayed as kind of a primitive shelter. They're anything but. For a start, the average roundhouse is larger than your medieval longhouse, for example. And we think they were occupied, or the ones associated with the reef systems, for at least 4,000 to 5,000 years. As you can see from the reconstruction, it was an organic wooden world. And we have excavated these in recent times and extracted carbon and materials from the floor and the occupation levels and the post holes, which would have supported the timbers for propping up the roof. So they really are complex structures. And interestingly, we're beginning to realise that there is significance, maybe a religious significance, involved with the creation of the huts. There often seems to be a key stone which was aligned onto a topographically distinct feature in the landscape, which may have acted as a foundation stone. And when the hut circles were abandoned, a local archaeologist has noticed that one of the door jambs, you can see my laser pointers highlighting a door jamb, seems to have been deliberately pushed over. Maybe that was some part of some elaborate closing down ceremony. And when we excavated the bed of a hut circle, all the pottery we found on the floor surfaces seemed to have been deliberately placed with the inner side up, and in the side of the hut circle where the most of the daylight would come in. Now, that could have been fluke, but more than likely there was something going on there, some type of ceremony, perhaps, to venerate the house as it fell out of use. Okay, now we're jumping forward a bit now to the medieval period. So I'm really sorry if we got any Iron Age fans out there. I can't fit anything in. And the Iron Age is that one period of Dartmoor where we have kind of surprisingly little evidence. It may be that if we went through all the archive material which has been recovered from excavations from the Dartmoor Excavation Committee's heyday 100 odd years ago, we would find a lot more Iron Age pottery than we currently know about. And if we were careful with our excavations, perhaps that evidence is waiting to be found. But apart from the 13 huts, hill forts, which ring Dartmoor, there's a dearth of evidence really for what was happening up in the Iron Age. The best guess is, I think, rather than it being totally abandoned, it was probably being grazed. The communal grazing and the seasonal grazing in the summer of that lush pasture was taking place. And more than likely, probably, we're getting some evidence from the southwest side of Dartmoor through the excavations in advance of the new Hemerdon mine that tin streaming, which I'll talk about in a minute, may have been taking place in the Iron Age as well, just at the very end of the period. But this object now is the famous Lidford penny. And it belongs to a period when Lidford was probably the preeminent settlement on Dartmoor, rather than and probably one of the most preeminent settlements in Devon, rather than the sleepy little village it is today. For in the period between 973 and 1050 AD, there was a royal mint in Dartmoor, in Lidford, sorry. And it was also a designated burh. Now, a burh is a fortified settlement which was decreed and set up by Alfred the Great as a kind of defensive system to halt Viking attacks or the Danish attacks when they were still very busy raiding us every now and again. And Lidford was designated a burh. It's a fantastic position, the village, from a strategic point of view. It occurs at the edge of a promontory, and you can see the steep gorge denoted by the hatches which surround the village on two sides. And a rampart was constructed to seal off that neck, and then a grid-like pattern of streets laid out. And we know from the Domesday book, from when the Normans turned up, there are at least 80 buildings in Lidford as well. And coupled with the early church, which I'm ringing with the pointer now, which hints that Lidford could have a 5th century establishment date, because that's dedicated to St Petroc, even though there is a bit of speculation amongst historians about that. It is likely that Lidford history goes way, way back, at least probably, well over 1200 years, probably 1500 years. For when the excavations were taking place into this castle, 5th century pottery also emerged as well, really high status pottery, which had been imported from North Africa. So Lidford has a very good pedigree. You can see the castle and the image to the left hand side and the church. Now this castle is a bit of an optical illusion. It looks like a castle, it's a very strong structure, but it was in fact a jail, and Lidford was the administrative centre of the Duchy of Cornwall when they took over control of Dartmoor in about the 12th century. And the Normans came here before them and built this ringwork. As you know, the Devonians were a bit of a rebellious bunch in the southwest. Took a bit longer for them to pacify, so they built a ringwork in the corner of Lidford as they subjugated the surrounding countryside. And as things settled down, they constructed the second castle within Lidford, a motte and bailey, was designed to look like a motte and bailey, and this keep, which turned into the courtrooms and the prison for the Duchy of Cornwall. And it's from here that they did carry out the administrative work of the forest and sometimes the stanary parliaments as well. So let's return to the coins. They are fantastic, and it is believed that over 1 million, possibly 1.5 million coins, silver coins, were minted in the Lidford mint alone. They're quite small. They have a diameter of about 2 centimeters and they weigh about 1.6 grams, but they are solid silver. And it's tempting to think that the silver may have come from a local source. The silver mines of Beer Alston are only 12 miles away to the south, but that link's never been proven. Now, Anglo-Saxon pennies carried the signature mark of the moneyer, and they were the mint master who controlled the minting of the coins. And we know that throughout the lifespan of the mint, there were 15 moneyers who worked in Lidford, and they had great names. And the selection of names is as follows. There was Elfwine, there was Athelstan, there was Brunner, there was Gudder, and there was Hunwine and Godwine. I think those names are fantastic and they're due a revival. But as mentioned, I think earlier, no trace yet of that mint has been found. Even with the limited archaeological excavations which have taken place in Lidford, nothing has emerged at the site of a mint. But just outside the Saxon defences, one of the lanes of Lidford today is called Silver Street. It's a bit of a tenuous link, but who knows? The mint operated continuously from the reigns of Ethelred II, and he was the unready one, in 1876 to 1016, and carried on through the reigns of Nut, Harold, and Edward the Confessor until about the Norman conquest. But it was that golden age of the late 10th and early 11th centuries when Lidford's production went through the roof. Now, you can see on the right-hand image that they had crosses embossed on them as well via the coin maker's die, and the image of the king as well. As I mentioned, that's Athelred on the left-hand side. But on the reverse of the coin, you can see a long cross. Or alternatively, it had a short cross. Now, the long cross design is thought to have allowed the coin to be cut into quarters to help pay be distributed amongst workers. And apparently, one silver penny was 1 day's pay. I don't know how accurate that information is, but it's got a nice ring to it. And every 3 years, or originally every 6 years, the king at the time would recall all the silver coins, and they'd be melted down and reminted. Now, interestingly, no pennies from Lidford have ever been found in Devon, which is a surprise when you consider the high numbers which were forged and minted here. And possibly, well, hundreds and hundreds have been found in Scandinavia. And the reason for this is down to the perennial bad boys of history, especially the medieval period, those pesky Vikings. English kings attempted to prevent Viking and Danish attacks by paying off the Vikings for protection money through a system known as Danegeld, and it's highly likely that most of Lidford's pennies ended up in the coffers of Scandinavia. And however, that approach of Danegeld was not always successful. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle of AD 997, records that Lidford was attacked by a Viking warband who then went on to destroy the abbey at Tavistock and lay waste to the surrounding area. Now, the jury is open as to whether the Vikings managed to capture Lidford or not, or in fact its defences held and the Viking hordes were beaten off. However, as there is no record of the coin supply being interrupted from the Lidford mint, it's possible that the Lidfordians saw those Vikings off. Okay, now we're staying in the medieval period for our next seventh object, and this relates to the pottery assemblage which was recovered from North Hall. Now, this is it looks pretty drab pottery, but I've selected this object and it's a highlight for me as it was part of a fantastic, and I mean fantastic, community excavation which took place as part of Dartmoor's More Than Meets the Eye National Lottery funded project a few years ago. And it was a success, not only archaeologically and improving our historical knowledge about Widdicombe, where North Hall is, and finding out more about the site. It introduced a lot of local people to archaeology and has trained up a band of local volunteers now who can be let loose with a fair degree of safety on our future excavations. And I'm hoping it will encourage a lot of local history groups as well to pursue their own projects as they realise what the Widdicombe History Group, who initiated this project, managed to achieve. The chap on the left is Peter Reynolds, and it was his idea to research Northall. It was the lost manor of Widdicombe, of which there were 6 manors during the medieval period. And you can see on the right an excavation taking place. And although the excavation didn't reveal much in the way of wall footings, we did find the complex arrangements of stone and timber buildings. But the main work, the archaeological record which was retrieved, was this fantastic pottery assemblage. And with the great documentary evidence which was pulled together by professional and local historians as well as some community members who are volunteering as part of the More Medieval project, we've been able to reconstruct the site. And this is what we think the manor, if we just go back to that empty field, for a comparison, may have looked like in the 14th century. We originally found some wall footings and timber buildings which preceded these buildings within the archaeological trenches. And this is a reconstruction drawing done by Richard Parker. And we think that Northall Manor in its development was key to the development and foundation of Widdicombe, which is the village growing up and famous today, but you can see it was in its embryonic stages in the 14th century. And some of that drab looking pottery we recovered turned out to be really exotic. On the left hand side, we found the remains of a French costrel barrel, which would have contained wine or beer or water for serving. And before this excavation took place, they were only ever found in high status parts of the urban elite houses in Exeter or down in Plymouth by Sutton Harbour. So the fact it was found in deposits at Northall indicates we had a really high status site here. And perhaps more importantly and more intriguingly was the plate on the right hand side, which is a reconstruction based on a few shards of pottery which had come all the way from Islamic Spain in the 15th century, a beautiful tin glazed plate. So we found lots of evidence for exotic fine tablewares and cups, which only someone who is rich and well connected and who owned land on and off Dartmoor as well could have afforded. We found bits of plasterwork, stained glass windows, as well, and also some pennies as well from 13th century France. So I just went to show what a fantastic project that was as well, and I hope in the future we'll have several more going forward. So what was generating all this wealth on Dartmoor? Well, we think it was, well, we know it was the tin industry. This kind of stone you can see in the middle isn't a modern bit of abstract sculpture. It's a mortar stone. And the mortar stone was fundamental in the processing of tin ore into a concentrate so it could be smelted and turned into a tin ingot, which could go off to market. Mortar stones are carefully chosen granite blocks that provided a strong surface on which the tin ore was crushed, and they are found often in the rectangular and ruinous remains of stamping mills. These mills are found along all of Dartmoor's valleys and rivers, where tin extraction and processing once took place. Remember those alluvial deposits I mentioned in the first slide, all that tin being rushed down thousands of years before, were readily available for those who had the labour to dig up and produce. The buildings were constructed roughly from moor stone and rectangular in plan, with walls just under 1 metre thick, and alongside the building was a wheel pit. Some structures were likely to have been roofed. Many of them had a water channel leading to them, which brought water to the wheel pit, which in turn powered a set of stamps. Stamps are wooden timbers, often iron shod, which were lifted up and down by the turning of the water wheel axle. And as they fell onto the tin ore, they gradually crushed it into a fine powder, which could be further processed through washing, settling, and later smelting. Over the years and through the operation of the stamps, hollows appeared in these mortar stones, and you can see the fantastic circular hollows. So you can see, just excuse me a second, how these stones were created, and often they had to be turned around. One surface would be efficient anymore, the hollows got too deep, so they'd turn the block over and reuse it again. And you often find in the remains of stamping mills blocks with 3 or 4, or mainly often 2 surfaces of hollowed depressions on them. Now, tin streaming took place everywhere, and it transformed the landscape. Here's a reconstruction which shows the physical labour involved in exploiting that alluvial tin, and the amount of soil and material which was moved and altered, and the river pollution which must have resulted as a result of the stream workings. And today they survive quite well. They're distinct features, these long, linear, often sinuous mounds of spoil contained within the scarps where the tin ground suddenly ended. So we know from documentary evidence that Dartmoor tin streaming really took off in the 12th century and lasted till just after the Tudor period, but we don't know when it really started. Who knows? The Bronze Age, bronze is an alloy of tin and copper, so maybe early on in the Bronze Age, people were noticing the tin ore and processing it. And maybe that early evidence of processing has been lost and remains hidden or destroyed by these later workings. Okay, moving on, because I'm realizing the time. Is this rather brutal feature? This is called a stoneworker's jumper. Okay, and to me, this represents the 18th and 19th century periods on Dartmoor, when Dartmoor took the shape it does today. And it was a busy place with the zeal of industrialisation. Vast areas were being transformed through the exploitation of natural resources, which in turn could take place by improvements in transport infrastructure, such as the coming of railways and tramways. Now, this is an iron bar, this jumper. It's about 1.5 meters long, but the length varies considerably. And it's quite heavy, and it's weighted in the middle with that kind of diamond of iron, which helped balance it when you were lifting it up and down, and the ends are pointed. And it just represents the physical effort involved, and reminds me of how during this period labour was cheap, and how those poor labourers were often exploited and paid a pittance for all that hard work they had to do. The jumpers are great for field archaeologists, as we know they were introduced, this technique for splitting and shaping stone, around about the year 1800, and the distinctive marks it leaves on the rock help us pinpoint the activity on the moor. And now there are various lengths, as I mentioned, and if you look carefully, Andy's face is in the way, I'm afraid, but just down here there are a couple of quarry workers. This is an engraving of Hay Tor Quarry, going for it, as it were. You can see some of the jumpers are really long, and you can see a couple just here as well, which are probably about 3 or 4 meters long, and it's likely that the quarry workers on the face itself are drilling shot holes down into which explosives were placed to blast blocks off from the quarry face, where they were later dressed. And here you can see how after the jumper had done its work and created drill holes, how the rock was split. This demonstrator here has inserted plugs, known locally as into the holes created by the jumper, and on either side you can just see thin slivers of metal called feathers, and as the plug was forced in between them, and they were struck regularly up and down the line of weakness in the granite, and it was a skill in itself deciding where to put these drill holes to fully split the granite away the way you wanted it to, as you kept hitting it again and again. So in theory, and it didn't work all the time, the granite would split in two, and then it could be processed further. On the left-hand side, you can already see that distinctive pattern which is left by the feather and tear and the jumper method. You can see those drill holes, and they were spaced about 10 to 15 centimeters apart and left a semicircular depression, compared to the earlier method from the medieval period, when more stone was split using chisels and wooden grooves. So unlike the tears and feathers, wooden wedges were hammered in to a chiseled out rectangular slot and then soaked in water, allowed to expand, and then hopefully split the granite. But that may have not always happened, as you can see here. Okay, now my last slide is a result of being brainwashed by the hot weather. I needed some refreshment by the end of it, so my attention's turned to cider. And as you can see from as I've been mentioning, stone working and stone dressing, granite was ideal material to produce millstones and crushing stones and press slabs, all vitally important for the cider making process in Devon. As you know, cider was the mainstay of the rural economy. I'm not sure how long when it was originally became that important, but we know from the Norman conquest onwards, people were brewing cider in Devon. And it was up until the First World War that it really formed the backstay of an agricultural labourer's payment. And you can see how those stone workers and stone splitters, which were using the jumpers, how skillful they were in making these artifacts. Now, on the top left-hand side image up here, this one was unfinished. This is in Merivale, and if you look carefully, you can see the remains of a prehistoric enclosure around this much later artifact. So it goes to show how the demand for stone was so intense, and with the opening up of Dartmoor, with the creation of turnpikes and making it more accessible, and roads and trackways, so anything was fair game for these stone workers, and often archaeological artifacts were recycled, as it were, were destroyed and turned into other artifacts. In the middle, so it never actually came to fruition. Perhaps the person who was buying this artifact suddenly became an abstainer at the last minute. But that, we believe, was to become an edge-set moorstone, which would have run around in this circular granite trough or apple crusher. And on the right-hand side, you can see the base of a cider press. And here, the crushed material, the apple pulp, which would have been ground up in this circular trough, was collected and made into a cheese with straw, and that was pressed by a plank, pressed down with the screwing mechanism, and the juices would gather out through the spout and be collected and allowed to ferment. And at Longstone Farm, you can see a cider press surviving. This is about 30 years old, this photo, and I'm hoping it's still there today. And you can see how this was probably a horse-powered mill, and the area in which the cider pressing took place is often called a pound house. And virtually the auctions associated with the cider pressing processing system are worth methodology are worth noting, because virtually every farm on Dartmoor would have had its own series of auctions. On the bottom right hand corner here, you can see the press I was talking about, and below that pressing board you can see the straw cheese which the apple pulp, after it being crushed, was put into, and apparently it was the very last dregs which made the best cider. Okay, now this map, this 1886 OS map from Mitchell-Coombe near Holme, just shows how extensive cider orchards were. Here's the main hamlet, but all around it you can see the OS symbol for orchards. They've all gone today. You can also pick up some of the lovely surviving medieval strip fields as well. That's another talk in itself. But you know, the apples growing in these orchards at Mitchell-Coombe's may have been distinct varieties just relating to that farm. And when we were excavating at Northall, one way we pinpointed the location of the manor was from an estate map which showed an ancient, well, a historically old orchard which appeared on these earlier maps and still survive today. And the owners of the farm had managed to do some research into those orchard varieties and had restocked and regrafted many of the surviving apple trees and propagated new ones and replenished that orchard to a stage where they're making cider again. And for those of us who dug at Northall, we enjoyed that cider sometimes very, very much in the hot periods of that dig, and very good cider it was as well. And the cider apples had great names, rather like the Anglo-Saxon names of the Moniers. These ones are a bit more evocative, and they included varieties such as Butterbox, Fair Maid of Devon, Slack McGirdle, Sweetbush, and Vitch's Plentiful as well, which are fantastic. And I guess some of these are now lost. But there's a revival in cider orchards, I'm happy to say, and there are now grants available to restock and plant new orchards. And at Mitchell-Coombe itself, some of these fields on the right-hand side have new orchards planted on them, which is fantastic. Okay, so I hope that hasn't made you too thirsty. It's now the end of my talk, and so thank you for listening. I hope it wasn't too rushed, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you for that. That was great. A really interesting talk there, Andy. Really enjoyed that. I'm just going to sort of put us on side by side here, so that's better. I heard there was a couple of distractions along the way. We had a motorbike at one point go past you, and with kids as well, I think. That jumper that you showed, I saw that today. I popped into the office and I saw that, and it's a big old heavy bar, and to be sort of swinging that all day, you're going to have to be quite a sort of a beefy sort of kind of guy to sort of do that, aren't you? So Nigel has just asked regarding tin streaming, do you know whether it was organised or by individual prospectors?
That's a really good question. And we think it was kind of a collaborative effort. So you'd buy a pitch of river, or you'd buy an area of, of area where you could prospect for tin, and you probably had to pay the landowner a hefty sum for that and give them a share of the profits as well. And the operations itself was seen over by a highly skilled master tinner who probably directed the labourers. And from recent excavations of spoil heaps, which were carried out in advance of Hemerdon Mine being developed, we know that the spoil just wasn't randomly placed in these prospecting tips. The actual material from the ground was arranged in such a way that the master tinner could come round and understand how deep the ore was below the surface and what quality it was, so they could make that assessment of whether or not it's worth opening up this area for workings.
Excellent. Oh, that's yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And
Mm.
hopefully that answered your question there, Nigel. Um, so I'm disappointed, Andy, as well, that you didn't mention any of my artifacts that I
Well,
had.
it's about
There's
that.
my That's my model of hammer down dagger that I made last year during lockdown.
Fantastic. I thought it was the real thing.
Yeah, yeah, of course you did, of course you did. And you might be able to see behind me. Yeah, look, that's my model of the beads that were made by. Um, that's my model of the White Horse Hill beads there, made out of salt dough and a bit of pasta wrapped in tin foil. So
It's good, good. There we go.
yeah, it's
The one
quality.
up on the screen. Very
It's
good.
quality replicas.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that has oh, I've just got some. Barbara Baker's just put excellent talk. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for your feedback on there. So that's good. So we've got. I also liked, Andy, the when you talk. I think it was number 2 when you started talking about all this flint scrapers and tools and things, and it sounded very much like you were talking about it with its interchangeable tools, as if it was actually like the Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, that's how they're often referred to these composite tools. Yeah, the Swiss Army knife of the Mesolithic. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think you've got a picture of it up, haven't you? I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
I have.
share.
Yeah, I've got the flints up there. And we know that from microscopic analysis of the edges, they were being constantly retouched and resharpened all the time. And often, if they didn't like, the tools were changed as well. So they had the skill to change them virtually within a few minutes from a projectile, from a blade to a projectile point, for example. So these
Yeah.
masters are fantastic. And they probably learned it at a very young age, just watching their parents.
So in terms of those tools that you've got, can you identify what some of the uses might have been?
I'm really rubbish at Flint. It's my weak point, but I'll give it a go. On the
Okay,
top
let me just give everyone the picture and then you can describe it.
Tom Gloyness is a member and watching this. He'll be in the audience. He'll be far better placed to do this. Anyway, yeah, I think the top ones are what's called blades, obviously, and they kind of acted as knives. They had a cutting edge as well. Now going down, we've got some chisel blades. They're a lot more rhomboidal ones, and they've got cutting edges on both sides. So they may have been put on the edges of points of wood, etc. They may have been used as something like a chisel. And the ones in the middle, a bit more mixed bag. So it's hard to know because the tools had multiple functions, and it's really down to the individual user and how they fitted in the hand. So, for example, some of those top ones, you can see they've got a very kind of obvious blade shape opposite a blunt edge as well, and that's the blunt edge they would have held it or cradled it in their hand, and they would have scraped the wood or the hide or whatever they were using the tool for, and got the blade away from them as well. So some of those top ones are probably piercers as well, for piercing hide and other materials in advance of sewing and that type of thing. I can't see any obvious projectile points there. You know, everyone always goes on about arrowheads, but I do have an arrowhead I found on the moor in my hands, Andy. If you I just wanted to show to people, if you visit Dartmoor, always keep your eyes open, particularly after thunderstorms when the soil and material has been washed around. Because if you can see here, how's that looking, Andy? Up a bit higher. A bit lower. Okay. So this is an arrowhead I found near Belliver. Literally, when I was just thinking about flint arrowheads, I looked down and found one. And I'm notoriously bad at finding flint. I was at university and I was and still walking ever since. But this is a beautiful bit, and it's an arrowhead, probably from the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age period, possibly a barbed and tanged. You can see a tang below the actual blade itself. But what I love of the arrowhead itself, what I love about it is how the flint has been deliberately selected with a white tip at the point. I believe that was intentional, just to elaborate the point of it. And all around the edges as well, you can see retouching, probably with a softer material, maybe an antler point as well, just so they could get the right type of pressure to create that sharpened edges around the top of the arrow blade itself. And you can see it's beautifully symmetrical and quite lethal looking at it as well. The size of the arrows, the blades, especially the arrowheads in the Mesolithic, is important as well, because it kind of reflects the size of game they were going after as well. So I think they were going after deer and more run-of-the-mill stuff like rabbits as well, and squirrels possibly.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, that's really good. And I'd love to find an arrowhead out on the moor. It's the iconic sort of bit of treasure, isn't it, that really connects you. And when I've held those in my hand, there's something
Yeah,
really magical about holding it and just really feeling like you do connect in some way with those people through thousands of years. Yeah, and it's not sort of spiritual nonsense. There's just something about knowing that someone has crafted that themselves, isn't it? And then
yes, indeed. Yeah,
yeah, fantastic. I've got a couple of I've got a few more questions that have come in now, so that's
right.
great. Marie, who's joined us all the way from America, from Oregon. She's been with us on a few of these talks, on all four of the talks actually, I think. She wants a question about the jumper, and it's really just a question about do you know why it's called a jumper?
Yeah, it's called a jumper allegedly because when they were, you had to lift it up and down, let it drop repeatedly. So it's almost as if the iron bar was jumping off the rock. And so to get the drill, they had to lift it up, dropped it, and they'd turn it, twist the blade around about 45 degrees. And there's that process, which over thousands of cycles must have created the drill holes. But they're called the jumpers because it's known as jumping the bar.
Yeah. So there you go, Murray. That's why it's called a jumper. And I just imagine those guys, yeah, just working so hard with those tools, just the noise and the sort of the physical effort. I mean, yeah, they must have worked hard,
Yeah,
and I guess they probably played quite hard as well
hopefully got
up
some
there.
side at the end of it.
A
Yeah.
bit of cider. Okay, Anne has been on as well. She says she's got a reproduction Bronze Age axe. It does chop small logs very well, and she just said she really enjoyed the talk. Yeah, when you showed us the polished axe, is it the Neolithic axe? I think it was.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
that,
when you showed us that, it was just striking that actually, if we're talking about the clearance of the moor and things, then actually, just how much effort that would have taken to sort of chop things down and
yeah, yeah.
clear
And
things.
the example they selected for us in the museum, this one's been a bit bashed and been in the wars a bit, and that's, I think most of Dartmoor's axes are found in river deposits, and so they've been eroded and weathered, what have you, as well, and they've lost their original patina. But if you go to a museum or look online for a Langdale axe or a greenstone axe, or if you want the creme de la creme of the Neolithic axe from the Magic Mountain in the Italian Alps, from the Jadeite Mountains there, from Mount Biso, they are amazing. They are the most beautiful things you could hope to see.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That's brilliant. So I'm going to move on because a few more questions have come in while we've been chatting. So that's brilliant. So thank you for these. So let's go through them a little bit. Jo Burgess is on. She wants to know
I
where yeah. She wants to know where the cider press with the groove is. I don't know whether she's going to go out and do some illicit cider pressing. But
Right, that's a really good question because my mind has gone blank, I'm afraid. I've got a feeling it's from near Longstone Manor, near Borator.
Okay,
Yeah,
brilliant.
I
That's
did,
great.
but that's where I think it is.
Okay, I was because I saw you flicking to your slides. I've not got them up at the moment, but I just quickly moved across, so I did show the slides for a
Yeah.
second. Um, unfortunately, I can't. You can't hear me, or they can't hear me talk if I've got you and the slides on.
Okay.
I haven't got it set up that way. Right, another question here. Ron Quilter, what do you want to say? Ron, you say, would it be possible to discover where the tin bead came from? The one that was found at White Horse Hill, for example, using modern chemical analysis.
That's a fantastic question, and the provenance of objects have been sourced that way before, but unfortunately, no one's done the background work on Dartmoor to get that chemical signature, which would be required from our tin ores from the cassiterite, which naturally occurred around the granite. That work hasn't been done, unfortunately, so we can't say for certain if that tin ingot was made from Southwest tin.
Yeah, and that's a real
The
challenge, isn't
honest
it?
truth, I'm afraid.
It's
Yeah.
the real challenge because we've got tin on them all, and you kind of would like to think that the Bronze Age people are taking some of that tin, but you've not got any evidence yet, have you?
I imagine it would be a lot more complicated story than we might imagine with our modern minds. Okay, they do
Yes.
something similar with stone monuments, and obviously the blue stones at Stonehenge, the classic example. And then maybe even in Dartmoor in the southwest, but the stones from a stone circle don't necessarily come from an immediate location. They may have come from an outcrop of rock or an area of more than several miles away or kilometres away, which was significant to that group for whatever reason we'll never understand.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I suppose we're just, as a layperson, I'm looking for sort of simple sort of connections there, but obviously things are much more complicated than they first look. Right, let's see. So I've done Ron. Nigel has asked again, do you think that the antiquarians removed a lot of historic evidence? And if so, how do we avoid doing the same for future generations?
Yes, yes, Nigel, you're absolutely right. When you look at some of the antiquarian reports and they describe opening up a kist and removing what they thought was blown in moor grass, uh, we begin to think, blimey, that could have been a fantastically preserved burial deposit. But they weren't to know. Really, they were operating a lot tighter timescales than we were. They didn't have the benefit of knowledge, which they helped build up, or access to the scientific analysis. If you've been on the White Horse Hill talk, you would know the huge amount of science which was thrown at that deposit to reveal the detailed information which we obtained from it was incredible. So yeah, unfortunately, they did do a lot of damage, the early antiquarians, but we learnt a lot from their mistakes and learnt a lot from what they found out as well. And I'm sure that in 10, even probably less than that, in 20 years' time, people will look back at my excavations and hold their hands up in shock about what the things are.
Yeah, it was interesting because a similar kind of question came up with Lee the other night, and yeah, just sort of this idea of having to maybe ration sort of what we do in order to safeguard things for future archaeologists.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh, okay. Steve Metcalf is asking, can you recommend any good books on Dartmoor archaeology, and do you wish you could go back and undo bad archaeology practice in the past? So that sort of connects in. I don't know whether he's suggesting your own bad archaeology practice, or whether he's suggesting sort of the bad archaeology practice of the
Yeah,
exploration committee, perhaps.
I would go back to a few of their kist opening events, that's for sure. And rather than leaving the sites of some hut circle digs and letting their labourers get on with the work, I think I would have stood around a bit more, doing a bit more observational and on their excavations. So that definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Was there another part of that
Yes.
question?
The other question was, recommend. Could you recommend any good
Yeah.
archaeology books on Dartmoor?
I don't know if it's behind you, Andy. It's the Phil Newman Field Guide to Dartmoor's Archaeology. It's absolutely fantastic. It's clear, it's concise, and Phil was used to work for the Royal Commission, the survey team, who went out and did a lot of the surveys of the archaeological sites which survive on Dartmoor. And each period is laid out and explained in great detail in a really reader-friendly manner. So I really recommend that book there.
Yeah. So
Still
that's
available. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the good book. It's a bit pricey. It's about £18, or it was when I bought it, but it is worth it. It really does sort of take you through in detail, but in enough sort of simplicity that you can that everyone should be able to read it and get a lot from it. So yeah, it is a great book there. Okay, brilliant. So hopefully that answers your question,
There
Steve.
are more specialist books available as well. There's
Yes.
a weighty tome about White Horse Hill, and there's an excellent book which includes the North Hall findings as well, which was produced by the More Medieval Project as part of the More Than Meets the Eye project as well.
Yeah, and there will be. I mean, we're hoping to publish some data about the Northall dig as well, aren't we? At some
Yes, yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
So
That will
that
appear
will.
in the next Transactions, the Devon Archaeological Society.
Yes. In the meantime, there is a little booklet that we have available somewhere, which is all about Northall Manor, and that's got sort of some pictures and bit about the actual archaeological investigation. In fact, I've probably got it down in my little sort of bookshelf down below me, but rather than you see the top of my head while I root for it, we'll just have to accept that I have that. Right, let's see who else has asked. Oh, Mike Jeffrey is on. My father used to use a jumper. He could drill a hole in stone in no time at all. And I still have his jumper, but I could never get it to drop in the same hole every time.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that is the big problem there, Mike, isn't it? Getting
yeah,
it to bounce into that same hole. Yeah, I'm fascinated in that how long it took them to do that kind of work, how long it took them to make those holes, because granite is so incredibly hard,
yeah.
and trying to chip away at it.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the skill, Andy, came in finding where to put your holes, finding that line of weakness. And there's
Yeah,
almost like a supernatural power, I think, how they would see. It's our stonemason at work. Andy can do it as well. He'll know exactly where to drill, and it will just split. You know, it's an amazing gift, really, built up through years of experience.
yes.
That's the hardest bit, I think. Easy bit, splitting the rock, unless you're Prince Trials. I've just put the photo of the splitting on again, Andy.
Okay, let me just share that.
Yeah. And actually, as it's on, as it's the 70th anniversary of the national park this year, I think for the 50th anniversary, it's a bit before my time working for the park, they set up a granite splitting demonstration for the prince to come along, and all he had to do was just tap the hammer onto the tears, and in theory, the whole thing would split. The prince was soon exhausted and he went very red in the face, much to the worry and consternation of the national park staff. And I think our works team had to step in and finish the job off for him. And the gatepost he made now stands out on the moor, and I know it's the gatepost which almost killed our monarch to be.
Well, so yeah, there's a stone post to tell a story, then, isn't it? I,
Absolutely.
I think there's a little video on Facebook or something of
Yeah,
Lee
yeah.
Lee and Andy Crabb are
And Andy Cribbett. Andy
Cribbett,
Cribbett.
sorry, yes, that's you, isn't it? Yeah, Andy Cribbett, our stonemason, doing that, and actually you can hear each of those metal pegs, those plugs, actually sort of making a dink noise, and they get higher and higher pitched as they get further in, until eventually, bang, it all
Uh,
cracks open.
there's a famous quote Tom Greaves, a really good eminent Dartmoor archaeologist, recorded. I forgot who said it, but the quote was, "It was purdy to hear the sound of the jumpers singing." So yeah, it just showed how local people really like that sound, how musical
Yes.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does, and you can actually find a whole load of videos online of people doing that, and in big Chinese quarries and things, splitting granite, and actually massive lumps of it as well. It is quite incredible. Uh,
Just going back to that, Michael's point, when I used to work in West Penwith, all the old boys there used to work in the mines. Used to say, going back to the Victorian, the golden age of tin mining, the locals in West Penwith are the hardest and the most skillful, because the shafts and adits were so narrow. Not only did they have to hold the drill bit, which is rather like a shortened jumper, they had to hit the thing with a hammer at the same time, where normally that was a two-man job. So they
wow.
regarded themselves as a cut above most other miners and quarry workers.
Yeah, that sounds a bit above and beyond. Although there's something about being in control of the tools yourself rather than having someone else whacking a big hammer near your hands. Yeah. Right, I've got a couple more questions there. So thanks for that, Mike. That set us going a little bit there. Um, Joe has asked, what happens to the lovely dolerite axe found in the brook near Rangerton Golf Course?
That's a really good question. I think it's in Torbay Museum, but I can chase up on that one.
Okay, so
Hmm.
there you go. So Torbay Museum, we think that is. Uh, I'm not sure what Steve said. He's put not Andy's, but I think that must be in relation to the fact that your axe wasn't quite as nice looking as the, presumably as the dolerite axe there. And Joe has just put a little plug on for the visitor centres, saying that that book we were talking about, The Field Archaeology of Dartmoor, is available in all good bookshops, but more importantly, it's available to buy in our visitor centres as well.
Yeah, I'll make another plug for the new Postbridge Visitor Centre. If you have an interest in archaeology, go up there. There's a fantastic archaeological display on at the moment, which has replicas from the White Horse Hill and other excavations on Dartmoor as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to rely on cardboard versions of the Hamel Down dagger, does it? It's got a proper reconstruction of the Hamel Down dagger there.
I should have
Uh,
included that in my talk. Sorry about
yeah, it's okay. Well, you couldn't fit everything in. We constrained you
that.
just to 10 things, didn't we? Yeah, that's good. Nigel says, do you have any recommendations for research on peat working? I've seen a brilliant paper online by Phil Newman.
Okay, that might be referring to the charcoal burners who use peat. It's an area we're hoping to do lots more peat research on. And as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, Southwest Water and ourselves are just about to embark on another big program of peatland restoration. And as part of that, there's a lot of money going forward to archaeological investigation and research as well. And people who sit on the board have asked if the peatland bibliography, which is the source book for all the work which has been done on peat research, will be updated and published as well. So watch this space. But I don't think there's any overriding document or piece of work on the peat industry. It's a fascinating area which does is worthy of more work. And it's a problem we have because it's unrecognised. It didn't have the glamour of the stone circles or the tramways, etc. A lot of them aren't protected as scheduled ancient monuments. So that makes the job of trying to get them protected a lot more difficult or taken or their significance appreciated a little bit harder. Now, we shouldn't have to rely on these designations to get that message across. And we are moving forward away from that. But it is a good question.
Okay, so there you go, Nigel. Hopefully that helps a little bit. There is watch this space. There is potentially a bibliography coming out, which will give you some more clues. Right, I think that is all the questions. I can't see I've missed anyone out there. I'll just double check to make sure I've not dropped someone out. No, and Marie's gone back and just said thank you for explaining about jumpers. So that's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Cool.
So yeah, so that's great. So thank you, Andy, for that talk. Really good and a really interesting way to sort of get us exploring a bit about Dartmoor's history and prehistory there, sort of rather than just sort of a straightforward linear talk. So yeah, really interesting to sort of look at those objects. And I knew that even though you only had 10 objects to talk about, that you were going to be able to talk for quite a while on each one because everything's got a whole story about it, hasn't it? Really, there's so much that it follows on from listening to each object being listed. Um, I've just got distracted by the chat. I could see another question coming in. Um, Mike has said, I'd like to make a miniature set of peat cutters tools, but having a problem finding any pictures of them. So, have you got any suggestions of
Well,
where?
have a look in, and I know it's behind you, Andy. Crossings Dartmoor Worker as well. I saw that on your shelf yesterday,
Uh, oh
and
yeah, yeah.
maybe in Worth as well, and maybe go along to the Museum of Dartmoor Life in Oakhampton. They may well have some tools there.
Yeah, there's a section on peat cutting in there. There's a picture of Mrs. Ware, the Warrener at Ditsworthy, with some peat on her fire. Don't know whether you might be able to see that there. But I can't find anything else. But I have just picked it up. Yeah, so that's a great little book there, and yeah, Worth is good, isn't it? It's got lots
I've
of stuff in there.
got a feeling back in the day there was a little exhibit up at Princetown Visitor Centre as well.
Yeah, I know. I know. In the education office, we've got a set of miniature granite tools. So we've
Yeah,
got like a miniature jumper and some various uh, hammers and things like that. But they are really tiny, sort of little things.
it'd be great to get a
Okay,
set though.
it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But it's just fascinating, really, to sort of see all that stuff. It's as your talk has explained. Once you see the objects, stories start to come to life. So actually, once you see that jumper, you get a sense of actually how heavy it is, and actually how hard that work would be, and you get a real sense of the person who must have been wielding that.
yeah.
Um, and that's, to me, what is quite exciting about what you do as your job, sort of exploring the archaeology, actually unearthing a bit of pottery or something, and actually being able to then sort of say something about the people who lived there and everything from those little artifacts that you find. That's what's fascinating about it, is that interpretation, isn't it? So yes. So thank you, Andy. I think that's all the questions. So I am going to draw it to a close. So as I said before, this is the last of our Heritage Festival talks. So I hope you've enjoyed them. I will be sending some feedback out to everyone who's been coming along. So if you have time to actually fill that in, that'd be great, because it really helps us sort of work out what works and what doesn't. And we're still getting to grips with the technology even at this stage, but it feels like actually some of these online talks are really worth doing and pursuing. But we obviously want to try and do some face-to-face things as well, and maybe some more walks as well at some point. So it'd be really good to have that whole mix of interpretation, which helps us all explore Dartmoor's heritage a bit more. So thank you. We're going to take a month off in August. We hopefully have something on in September, and then through the winter months as well. In the meantime, if you're interested in wildlife, then we are going to have a little wildlife day, a wildlife festival out at Meldon on the 17th of August. So if you've got family and friends who you think would enjoy that, then please bring them along. There'll be more details on the website soon about the Meldon Festival, or I think you can probably find out about it now actually. But in the meantime, thank you for coming along this evening. Really lovely to have you all with us. Not quite as hot and sticky as it was the other night, but still pretty warm. So I think we'll all go and get a nice glass of water and cool down a bit. Lovely to see you all. Please take care, and I shall wave you all goodbye and see you very soon. Take care, everyone.